assuming that you are in a job search, what do you need to bear in mind that happens maybe consistently in election years or is unique to this election?
We can always anticipate longer hiring processes. They want top talent. They don't want to necessarily release you to their competitors. So someone's engaged in the hiring process now and they are kind of in this wait and see mode, you can expect they're going to stretch it out a bit. We'll also see an increase in risk avoidance. If they are kind of hedging and they're not quite sure what they should invest in, if you're perceived as a risky candidate or as kind of a stretch hire, it's probably not going to happen for you. So it's crucial for us to position ourselves as that person who can come in and really quickly affect change, that person who is really adaptable, who can kind of be malleable to whatever could happen in a changing market.
The idea of job security is outdated as a landline. If you haven't been in a search for a while, it's probable you will at some point, by choice or not. Most executives admit to staying way too long or sense what's coming and justify staying anyway. There's another reason. The faulty belief that navigating to what's next will inevitably be worse and has to suck. Screw that. Lauren Greif has spent a lifetime in corporate and executive search, calling bullshit on stale career advice that most still use. This is Career Blast in a Half, the career podcast for executives ready to cut past outdated career advice to fuel your outcomes now. So let's go.
Today, we're talking about something that is so timely and so important at this particular moment, which is how is your job search affected or not by it being an election year? And we're roughly around 60 days before the election in November. And I invited back to the show Erica Reckcamp, who is a colleague, a dear, dear, dear friend, and a resume writer like I honestly don't know many that stand head and shoulders as a point of differentiation, not just from her actual work product, but for understanding the marketplace. So Erica, we are so happy to have you here. And thank you so much for being so clear and really experienced in this particular phenomenon in the marketplace.
Well, I'm always happy to chat with you. As you're well aware, you say, and I'm just going to jump. And we've always got interesting things to talk about. So I can't wait to dig in.
Always. So whether you're in a job search, whether you're in your career and you're wondering about bonuses, promotions, things like that, overarchingly, how does it being an election year affect the labor market and, people within their respective, places of their work life?
Sure. Yeah, no, even in terms of the internal environment, like you said, even if somebody's not in job search mode, political discussions come up, right? And we've seen, an increase in volatility around those discussions. We've seen a lot of concerns about that rhetoric, and people are fearing retribution in the workplace. So whether you are, you think you're happily employed and then, sometimes the culture starts to shift, or if you're in job search mode and you're vetting the company culture, right? Some of these, you can ask leading questions without being like, confrontational, but that can help you gauge maybe what's the level of acceptance, even if you're having these conversations, and how it might impact the organization moving forward, how willing someone is to have the conversation, depending on, politics aside, depending on the the policies that come through, how it might impact the business. If we're not talking about that, if we're not coming up with a strategy around these potential changes, that could be problematic, and it could be a sign for you, right, as to how healthy is your workplace right now.
So wait, let me just ask you something. Like, what would it sound like to ask that maybe delicate question?
Sure.
What would that sound like?
And it's fine to introduce a disclaimer, and just say that, politics aside, we know that there's going to be a shift in power. What do we see as potential impacts on the business within the next couple years? Are we anticipating, changes in minimum wage? Are we anticipating, because that can especially impact small businesses, entrepreneurs very seriously. Are we expecting any initiatives to be coming through, whether statewide, nationally, on jobs creation? How's that going to affect our market? Taxation. Are we going to have insurance changes that are going to change our HR policies? And that's gonna affect comp packages. That's going to affect, as you talked about, bonuses, trade agreements, supply chain changes, and then even maybe you're not in an industry that's hugely impacted by these things, but we still might see more hesitation, uncertainty in terms of investments, right? Duke University conducted a study, and it's found that 47% of CFOs, they practice restraint in investing when there's political uncertainty. And so they have reason to reduce hiring, and they cite that as a reason to reduce hiring. We'll see an increase in short-term roles. We'll see an increase in using flexible staffing models during election
Mm.
years. We'll see an increase in more government jobs, right? Or more, short-term polling hiring, right? And so even people who maybe they're in the middle of an active job search, we might see them take a bridge job because it's available. And then you've got to consider, how is that going to affect your goals overall? Because it can actually stall a search to take on those types of roles. But that's an informed decision that you have to make for yourself, for your family. But it is going to affect, right, the market, the workplace, indefinitely.
So, assuming that you are in a job search, what do you need to bear in mind that happens maybe consistently in election years or is unique to this election?
We can always anticipate longer hiring processes. They want top talent. They don't want to necessarily release you to their competitors. So someone's engaged in the hiring process now, and they are kind of in this wait and see mode. You can expect they're going to stretch it out a bit, right? Unless they've said specifically it's going to start in a week, it's going to start in 2 weeks, we need somebody now. No, if you're just starting conversations with recruiters, it's probably not going to be happening really soon. There are pros and cons to this, right? The pro is that you have more of an opportunity to find out if this is really the right place for you, to ask those questions about how do they have a strategy behind how they're going to handle inevitable market changes. We'll also see an increase in risk avoidance, right? So if they are kind of hedging and they're not quite sure what they should invest in, if you're perceived as a risky candidate or as kind of a stretch hire, it's probably not gonna happen for you, right? So it's crucial for us to position ourselves as that person who can come in and really quickly affect change, that person who is really adaptable, right? Who can kind of be malleable to whatever could happen in the state of a changing market, right? In that we know it's going to change. The
So what do you do? Let me just say, like, so what
Sure.
would be flagged as risk? Because that could be
Sure.
very broad. What is a tell that says, "Ooh, there's risk"? That could be a deterrent from having conversations or hiring.
Absolutely. So they're pretty standard, regardless of the market, right? If somebody has a very long tenure, right? If you've been at AT&T for 35 years, they're going to have concerns like maybe this candidate is really stagnant. Maybe they're averse to change. Maybe their network is really limited. Have they really been through a lot of these culture, people who change positions every 5 years, they're working in different environments. They're working with a lot of different people. There is no status quo, right? Whereas if you're coming in with that kind of work history, that kind of candidate, we might say, well, I'm very loyal, right? But they might say, I don't know, is this person going to come into the conference room saying, well, at my last employer, we did it this way every time, right? No one really wants to deal with that. The flip side's also true. If someone's got a lot of, year-long roles, typically we don't see high ROI on a hire till after about 2 years. We don't see a profit made on the
Mm.
hire, right? So with hiring costs, placing those ads, taking time out from your productive workforce in order to have them interview, vet these hires, and then train them, get them up to speed. They typically don't see a return on that investment until 2 years. So if someone's frequently leaving before that, and obviously there are some people who are able to make a huge impact much more quickly than that, but in general, that's seen as the risk factor. I will even see requisitions that say no more than 2 positions in the last 5 years, no more than 5 positions in the last 10 years. Like they can make up these kind of imaginary lines to say that this is what I perceive as risk. The market as a whole, how do we address that? We can combine, if we've got a number of short-term roles, maybe we would put that under the umbrella of IT consulting, right? And
Mhm.
then list a couple of those together, especially with the SVB banking collapse. There have been a lot of bleeding in tech. We might see somebody making those types of decisions. Additionally, if someone is positioning themselves as overqualified, right? Maybe you've had multi-billion dollar impact. Maybe you've had global accounts and then you decided, okay, well, once COVID hit, the supply chain's really different. I'm going to focus on national and I really don't want to travel as much as I used to. Then guess what? Your narrative needs to shift to national. Maybe you don't talk about the team size and the budget size if it's overwhelming to the current places that you're targeting that you don't want to have to travel as far. A lot of people conflate age discrimination with overqualified, and they're completely separate things, right?
Mhm.
Age discrimination could be another one, but more often it's in terms of how we present ourselves, right? The concerns behind age discrimination are, are you condescending to junior colleagues? Have you not had any sort of professional development since you got your degree 30 or 40 years ago? Is your network completely stagnant or up only, right? Some people confuse networking with, well, I can only network with people on par with me or above. You are hugely limiting your prospect pool by doing that. Anyone inside an organization who's a trusted person, a trusted figure in the company can recommend a conversation, someone that they think could add value. So you're missing out on huge opportunities. There's also the two-way mentor-mentee, right? We learn from all levels. So you're really cutting yourself off from a lot by doing that. So they're looking for those things when they're saying, when they're concerned about age, that's actually what they're looking for. If you showcase that you're actively involved in your field, if you showcase that you've been involved in mentor-mentee relationships, if you show adaptability, either through your accomplishments or through your engagement with professional organizations or through professional development, right? There are so many ways that we can offset those concerns. So those are some of the really common risk factors, but they're absolutely something that you can address and that you can position yourself really effectively, if you're intentional about it.
100%. And I'm big on believing that ageism isn't going away, but there's lots that we could do to also increase our quotient of relevance. And so much of this, as you said, is part of the narrative and also part of the interface that happens when people come to your LinkedIn, because it doesn't take but a nanosecond for them to figure out, that that person is still using LinkedIn the way that it was invented, back in, the 1900s or whatever it is, right?
Right, right.
So we want to make sure that all of those bells and whistles are eliminating suspect and risk. So
Absolutely.
that's the election year. So as far as the resume goes, and one of the things that we've talked about in past episodes has been, what does the pandemic resume look like? What does the post-pandemic resume look like? What is the election year resume all about?
Okay, so like we said, low risk, versatility. You might decide I'm not going to target one of these industries that's particularly vulnerable right now, or maybe I know I need to position myself for a career change or a career pivot, in which case maybe you're not doubling down on industry. Maybe you're focusing on your functional expertise, which is an asset anyway that really opens up the market to you, a lot more conversations. Showcasing a visible impact. It's one thing to say, I built something. It's another thing to say, I built the team from 0 to 23 within 3 years, right?
Shout out to
So
metrics.
yeah, numbers, dollars, percents. Yes. Yeah. And automation, AI, right? Everybody, it's for the last 5 years, there's been a huge emphasis on we've got to make it better. Either the choices are really hard. They're saying either it's got to come through the staff, it's got to come through pricing, it's got to come through automations and AI, and we just let some things happen through attrition, but we're not going to do a major layoff. It's been a huge push for 5 years. It's not changing, right? Also, making sure that you're staying current in some of those AI topics. It might sound really big and scary, but a lot of times, if there are just a couple tools relevant to your field, start playing with them. And then you'll figure out a couple talking points that you can weave into some of these conversations, perhaps incorporate within your resume, LinkedIn profile. And then again, you don't look like a dinosaur, right? You don't look like you're still trying to do to print in the digital age, right? So we're making sure that we are showcasing that we're current, we're relevant, and that we're contributing to the conversation. What does this mean? This does mean that you're engaging. This does mean, whether it's through a LinkedIn content strategy, whether it's through a professional organization or a LinkedIn group, whether it's contributing thought leadership, speaking on podcasts, speaking on panels, and engaging with others who do so, right? So that means providing social proof, right? Through writing recommendations, through writing reviews of your favorite podcasts like Lauren's or Rock, right? All of that, sourcing and scraping tools can find that. Search results factor that in. So all of that is signaling that you are a vibrant contributing member of the field, even if you're still in job search mode.
So I really want to kind of scratch the surface on this. I know you said sourcing and scraping, and I'm going there because one of the things that I think that I know from our clients, right, is that they're very invested in their LinkedIn profile and to some degree commenting and engagement. But if a hiring manager, given the state of the state with the election year and all that, is doing their own searching and scraping, how deep can they really go? I mean, aside from a few Google searches and all of that, what's the depth and the length, and do they do that on a regular basis for folks at the executive level? How does that vary?
It really depends on how niche, the role might be. And it depends on the tools that they're willing to use, right? And we've seen there's some functionality out there that's pretty wild. HireVue. Sometimes we'll see, Amazon came out with all these really great tools, and then they found all this bias, so they pulled back, and they're like, never mind, a human will look at everything. And now they're kind of saying like, well, wait, we don't need so many recruiters. We feel like the tools are getting better. Same thing with HireVue. They came out with, biometric scanning and all this kind of crazy stuff. And then they're like, well, maybe this isn't ethical. Well, guess what? Tolerance builds, right? At first, we didn't think it was cool for people to like be able to track us. And now we're like tracking our own kids as they go get candy bars, right? So tolerance builds for these types of things. In terms of sourcing and scraping tools, I've seen really advanced results from these. So you could have a PowerPoint that you put online from when you were still getting your master's in microbiology. And they'll find it and they'll be like, hey, are you still, doing those biometric, the microbiology research? Can you come into this zoological society? And I mean, it's pretty wild. So if you do have, some talking points that you want to be associated with, if you do have expertise that you would like to build, you start contributing, you start entering those conversations, right? If you search Amazon for topics that you want to be known for, write book reviews on those. If you decide to share a PowerPoint, if you decide to share your portfolio, right? All of these things are kind of building that social proof for you. And once these AI tools get more sophisticated, like you can create your own Perplexity profile so that when someone does an AI search on you, you're informing all of
Oh
it.
my goodness.
Yes.
So
So,
this
I
is
mean, in terms of opportunities, they're out there. It's just a matter of, how do you want to play?
well, what I really appreciate so much about what you just said is it can work in your favor or without, right? So this works in both directions. Yeah, on the upside, of course, you're leaving that trail. You're validating all these proof points along the way so that you are stacking up that credibility, that trust, the proof points, all that good stuff. Or you're just reinforcing a message that says, you know what, like you're a ghost. I can't find you anywhere. And when I do find you, I don't recognize who this person is. So
Yes.
both things can apply. So
Yes, so you do want a clean house too. If you've got that old PowerPoint presentation that's completely unrelated to you now, now's the time to bring it down. Could they still find it? Yes, but at least it'll show that if you have everything public facing, it really clouds the narrative.
okay. So do your own sweep, right? Do some good hygiene and make sure that those things are removed. And that we're not talking about like social media like Facebook or Twitter or X or IG or anything like that. Like those are those separate?
Those could be included also. I mean, I definitely think everyone should audit their socials
Mhm.
before they engage on a search, just because there could be something that you're like, well, this is fine if my family sees it. That if you're in job search mode, you'll be like, they don't really need to see me at a barbecue with a red Solo cup, maybe looking
Exactly.
a little too happy. Like, because they
Exactly.
are, I mean, in some cases, they're deciding if they want to fund this lifestyle. There are people, companies who do checks of people's lifestyles. So you want to consider what you're putting out there. Keep it clean, keep it positive, keep it, dial down if obviously everyone's entitled to their political beliefs, but you don't need to make it contentious. You don't need to be poking the sleeping bear, right? Especially when you're in a job search. And if you do, like I said, they can still find it, but if you're not having it publicly posted, at least they'll say, okay, well, this person understood. They decided it wasn't something that they wanted to be part of
Now,
their
I mean,
brand.
I do have to ask this. Are they able to tell which political party you're registered at? And does that
Uh, I don't believe so. I think that it would be something that you would reveal.
you would be disclosing? Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I was
Yes.
like,
Either through what you're liking or what you're sharing. They can guess, they can typically guess, but
okay. Separately and specifically on, I'm just going to call them hot issues, right? Childcare, healthcare, environmental issues, people in those areas. And we talked about this right before the show. So much of this is up in the air, wait and see
Mhm.
mode, wait and see. Aside from, being in a holding pattern, how do those industries that are a little bit touchier, how do those how do we kind of thread that needle?
One thing is to really read up on what's happening now. So, like DEI could be another one, right? SHRM just took
DEI,
the
for
E
sure.
and they're doing inclusion and diversity. Or, there's also the other side of the pendulum, which is merit, excellence, and intelligence, where you're just, hiring based on individual achievement. So, being able to have those conversations and speak in current terms is really important. Another thing to keep in mind is looking for adjacent fields that are stronger, right? So if somebody is in healthcare, maybe they'll switch to med tech, or they're in pharma, maybe they'll
Mm,
switch to biotech, right? So
mm,
there's huge growth, lots of investment, right? Especially in AI enabled tools, right? Tempest AI is doing some really huge
mm.
things. So it's still exciting. There's still lots of opportunities. It's just you kind of go watch where the traffic's flowing.
Hmm. Right, right. So you can kind of piggyback on top of a less volatile or transitory kind of industry. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not to say that, sometimes some, health systems that, they lost a lot of funding post COVID. So they're doing a lot of restructuring. That's not to say if you're an exceptional candidate, they probably still want to talk to you. So that's not to say never, right? So if
Right.
you know exactly where you want to be, you know exactly where you thrive, even if it is a volatile market, I'm not saying don't go for it, but understand that it's going to take a little longer to establish that credibility, and there's going to be more vetting involved.
Mm-hmm. Right. And more vetting could mean more interviews for sure.
More interviews, more homework, right? They're asking for
Yeah.
so many hours of pre-work, of strategies, of you doing research and proof. And if you're faced with something like that, I would say know your limits ahead of time. If you say I'm
Mhm.
willing to devote 50 hours to this opportunity, I'm willing because I'm really excited about it, know that.
Right.
And then be able to say,
As
okay,
opposed
I've
to
been working
today,
on this.
90 hours. Oh my God. No way. Right. That's
Yeah,
excessive.
yeah.
Right. So know your limitations for sure. Also, any difference for men and women, because some of these electoral topics are very gender specific.
Right. Well, and sometimes if something is highly aligned with our values, then it might be appropriate to send those signals, right? That it's not okay with me if you don't have any women in leadership positions, right? So saying that you are a chief member is sending that signal. Um, if you do have a lot of investment in equity programs, then guess what? That could be something you're talking about. Something that might be contentious or controversial, somebody's religious affiliation. Okay, well, guess what? If you worked within, a church or a temple for the past 10 years and you're targeting religious organizations, guess what? We have to talk about it. So
Totally.
sometimes it narrows the scope of your search, but in a meaningful way. Sometimes it's
Yep.
a powerful because you don't want to waste your time talking to people
Yeah.
who aren't on board with those values. For someone
Absolutely.
who's doesn't want to narrow their search to make sure they want to broaden it significantly, then we would be careful to avoid that language. So if we want to, and especially in male dominated fields, if we want to position ourselves to be evaluated solely based on our candidacy and our merit, not on our gender, then we're careful to remove things that would speak to that, right?
Hmm.
Um, if we want that to be part of the narrative, to be part of the reason that you're willing to invest in me is because I'm going to affect change. I'm going to create an employee resource group. I'm going to show the women within this organization what we really can do, or the underrepresented groups, right?
Hmm.
Um, then that would be part of your narrative. And it could be actually a big part of your why and a big reason to hire someone, right? So,
Hmm.
depending on how you intend to navigate that, would inform your content strategy. Um, Men and women both are facing hurdles. I'm hearing a lot of resistance and some upset from men who think if it was 10 years ago, I'd already have a job. I'm not being hired because I'm not a woman, because I'm not a minority, right? So we're seeing that resistance on both ends, focusing on impact, measurable impact, you knowing your story, your value offering, your impact is huge. And then you continuing those conversations, right? Whether it's a networking conversation, whether it's an interview, you stay in the conversation. It's not someone else was hired, oh, boo hoo, I'm never talking to them again. It's stay in the conversation, continue contributing at a high level, because guess what? There are going to be other opportunities. They know other people besides the 3 people in house, right? So focusing on that is much more constructive than being upset that you're in whatever camp that you happen to land in.
So that's your safe zone, right? Is like go back to impact, go back to the places where you have that credibility and leave that other stuff kind of like on the
It's a
side
distraction.
or right, exactly. So you, I really appreciate that because you want to find those places where you might need to deflect, and that could also be with age, and it could also be with some of these other hot buttons, right? Go back to the real meat and potatoes of what you would be there to do and leave some of these other maybe ego-based or peripheral issues, out of the equation as much as you can.
Right. Right. Or recognize an offset, right? If that's the thing. Like there are a lot of the thing that we want to be really careful about is to not let anything become an excuse for inaction, right?
Right.
It's one thing to recognize, okay, I have a 5-year gap. I recognize that. I can take measures to address the gap, right? Or I can complain and use that as an excuse and not have any of these conversations. So we always have a choice. And then if we do say, okay, well, I filled it with some professional development and I'm hitting my network and they're telling me that's not enough. Okay, well, then what's my next step? Like, I'm going to take that feedback and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to do a little bit of consulting work so that I have more of an on ramp, right?
Sure. Yes.
So it's recognition. Like, it's one thing just to recognize that something is happening. Making sure that we're accurate is another, right? It's not, maybe it's not age discrimination, maybe it's overqualified, maybe it's not age discrimination, maybe it's that I haven't actually articulated my wins in a meaningful way, right? And then moving on, taking that information for progress.
Okay, so now this is the last question, and I'm not trying to have you be Nate Silver from the the statistician or anything like that predicting our future, but I do want to ask you. So now here we are. Let's just say we're end of November. We're wrapping up the year. How long does it take before the equilibrium comes back into play? Like what might we be able to expect? And of course, this is, we don't know which way this is going to go. But my point is, when does the dust settle? January, February? How long does it take for the halo of it's an election year to kind of fade off?
I think it's going to be a couple things, because this year's really tricky because we had a late stage candidate switch. So people aren't as clear on what the narrative is, right? We've also just got a lot of smoke and mirrors in general. So I do think it will be more like February, March when we actually see, there's the things people say when they're on the campaign trail, and then there are the things people actually do once they get in office. So once we start to see who's coming into the cabinet, we start to see, okay, when they said jobs creation, what did they mean? Did they mean construction, infrastructure? Did they mean, tech competition, making sure that we're competitive in the global market and on AI, right? And seeing how where those chips fall, then we'll start to see, okay, now I know what are the strong markets. Now we have a better hold on hiring and job reports.
All right. So you heard it here, guys. You heard it right here from one of the most reliable sources that I know, and I know many, many, many of you know and love and trust Erica, and for good reason. So please make sure that you follow Erica. Her link is below. And separately, I just want to thank you all for listening to this kind of like touchy, but also very important topic on how our careers are affected when it's an election year and what we can do to be able to see around the corner and take things out of any kind of an excuse or inaction place so that we are in as much control or as in much of a pilot situation rather than a passenger one. So, boy, I am so appreciative. Thank you so much, Erica. And for all of you, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being so incredibly loyal. Please go ahead, if you haven't subscribed already, please go ahead and do so. And of course, we would so appreciate a podcast review. This keeps us going and going and going. And we love you. And we wish you all good things as the election is coming up. And don't forget to vote. All right? Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining today. We appreciate your listening ears. Big time. We ask this: use these tools, not tomorrow, right now. and share them by spreading the love, leaving us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss the next Career Blast in a Half. Most of all, thank you for you.